Hi, everybody. Welcome back to World History. This is our last section of notes for this chapter. We'll be doing 1903 and 1904 today. Your assignment when we are finished with notes for today is to complete your Chapter 19 review guide. Your quiz will be next class. This is also our last section of notes for the fall semester of 2022, meaning after this video is done, the channel will be going on hiatus until January. So, for the last time this semester, let's go ahead and get your notes out and let's get started. I'm just going to preemptively place my bubble up here. So again, we've really talked about this already last time, but people began to move to these new industrial cities. This industrial revolution provided a lot of wealth to entrepreneurs, but at the same time, workers experienced a lot of poverty, harsh living and work conditions, and reforms needed to be made. Now, we have to talk about urbanization, or the movement of people to cities. With these changes in farming, population growth, demand for workers, and these factories, we're seeing a massive growth of these cities. London went from a relatively small town to a bustling city. Now, we even see a new social class begin to emerge. These entrepreneurs benefited the most, and a new middle class known as the bourgeoisie begins to emerge in England. We've kind of talked about the bourgeoisie a little bit, if you remember last chapter from the French Revolution. This was made up of merchants, inventors, skilled artisans, really these true rags to riches stories. They started out really poor, and then they were able to make a name for themselves and be able to grow from there. They also usually had very well-furnished and spacious homes, fancy clothing, and their women were able to stay home and raise their children instead of having to go out and work. Now, we also have the industrial working class. Now, they lived in tenements, or the slums, multi-story buildings divided into apartments. Typically, there was up to 20 people in one apartment, the equivalent size of about half my classroom. It was unsanitary and overcrowded. And these labor unions or workers' organizations are going to try, I emphasis on try, to make things better for everybody else. Now, we got to talk about the Luddites. These are a group of textile workers who resisted these labor-saving machines that cost people their jobs. Because we even see this today. The automation of a job means typically someone's not going to have a job anymore. So they got a little violent, smashed some machines, burned some factories down, did whatever it took to protect people's jobs. Now, people are going to find some comfort in religion, specifically Methodism, under the leadership of John Wesley, who stressed a personal sense of faith. Hold that thought. I will be right back.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. I should put something else.
So 8:45
Okay.
and then we should be good.
Okay.
And this rate, how we answer 1 through 3. Thank you.
I'm back. So, again, John Wesley's going to stress the personal sense of faith, that life can be improved with sober and moral ways, that people could learn to read and write, as well as go from revolution to reform. We really start to see a movement away from these overthrowings of the old ways of life that we've been talking about the last couple chapters to more so advocating for reforms in a more peaceful manner. So, life in the factories and the mines, you face pretty harsh conditions. It was a 12 to 16 hour workday, 6 to 7 days a week. You were only allowed to break with permission, and typically it was only one. Accidents were pretty common. There was also poor air quality to the point that your lungs, if you worked in textiles, and if you do the laundry at home, the dryers, you're supposed to clean out the lint every time you use it. Yeah, your lungs are going to start filling up with the lint because you're around all of that. And if you were sick or injured, you lost your job. There was no protection. Unlike today where we have things like workman's comp, you don't have that today. I mean, back then. Back then, your hand got mangled in the machine. Sorry, you're out of luck. Also, women could easily adapt more to these machines. They were easier to manage. And for the time, you could pay them half the cost. So it was a lot cheaper to hire women. Now, miners faced even worse conditions, but they were paid more, but they were working in absolute darkness. The coal dust is flammable and causes cancer. Um, there were also some dangers. Explosions going off near you, the tunnel flooding, or my least favorite one, the tunnel collapses on top of you and you're buried alive. Ugh, no thank you. Now, even children were working at this point in history, and they had even more dangerous jobs. They were to change spools on the loom machines, crawl under the machines, carry heavy loads, work in extreme heat. Eventually, child labor reform laws are going to be passed, known as the Factory Acts, which limited them to a 12-hour workday, meaning you could only make them work 12 hours, but there's nothing saying you can't make them work. And inspectors were there to enforce it. And I say enforce with quotations, because they really weren't there to enforce it. So, some results of industrialization. Was it a blessing or a curse? Well, there was some hardships. There were some reforms. People gained the right to vote. There was more jobs, more opportunities. So it's kind of on a balanced scale of, do we determine, was it good? Was it bad? We don't know. So moving on into section 4, the final section of this semester. So, kind of as a reminder, we've talked about laissez-faire before under Adam Smith. This is the idea that the government should not interfere in business. Again, he wrote The Wealth of Nations, advocated for a free market. He wanted to help everyone, and he wanted to see more goods at lower prices. And he thought the success of the Industrial Revolution was key to this. So we also have Thomas Malthus, who holds a more bleak view. He's kind of like one of those, at best I could say, was probably like a doomsday thinker during his time. He thought the population would outgrow the food supply and that the poor would suffer. He was wrong. The food supply grew even faster than the population at this point in history. Now, today, on the other hand, we may take a little bit more of a look at his thoughts, but back then, not as big of an impact. Then we have David Ricardo, who placed the iron law of wages out there, saying there was little hope for the working class to escape poverty, and their wage increase typically meant a child increase, because you could afford a child. This whole idea of the iron law of wages is still really true today for most families. So again, kind of just wrapping up these laissez-faire economists, they opposed government help. The laws of the free market should help everybody. They encouraged thrift, hard work, and limiting family size, because the smaller the family you had, the less it would cost to house, clothe, and feed them. Ooh, so utilitarians are for limited government. They wanted to modify some things and justify some government intervention. They wanted to modify this laissez-faire to say, well, the government should have a reason to get involved at this point. And one of the biggest leaders of this is Jeremy Bentham. And he put forward the idea of utilitarianism, an idea that the goal of society should be the greatest happiness for the greatest number of citizens. And put forward the idea, do laws provide more pleasure than pain? He also advocated a law for personal and individual freedoms as well. John Stuart Mill, who thought the government should improve the hard lives of the working class, and that middle-class happiness should not harm the working class voting, and that they should have voting rights. Really, Mill's ideas are going to lay the groundwork for a lot of these suffrage movements we're going to see in the later part of the 19th century and into the 20th century as well, but we'll talk more about that on another day. And now we have to talk about socialism. So the enlightened beliefs of goodness of human nature and concern for social justice are going to influence the idea of socialism, where people as a whole, rather than private individuals, own and operate the means of production. These include farms, factories, railways, and other large businesses that produced and distributed goods. The best way I could explain means of production to you is, think if you are an ice cream business. Saying you own the means of production means you own a dairy farm, a place where you process your milk. where you grow your other ingredients, where you make your ice cream, where you sell your ice cream. So, bringing back this idea of utopia, remember we talked about that all the way back in chapter 13. Robert Owen set up a model community in Scotland. He was a successful mill owner, he was against child labor, and he was pro-labor union. His ideas worked for a little bit, but eventually it fell apart. But by far, probably the most important person we need to talk about this chapter, at least this section anyway, is Karl Marx, a German philosopher, and he provided the scientific aspect of socialism. With Friedrich Engels, he wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848, which put forward an idea known as communism, or a form of socialism, where the struggle between social classes would lead to a classless society, where all means of production would be owned by the community, and that economics drives history. Surprisingly, Marx is going to play a large role in the rest of the 19th century and a great role in the 20th century when we talk about countries like the Soviet Union, which we'll talk about next semester. So essentially, his idea was the haves are the bourgeoisie versus the have-nots, or the proletariat. This is the working class. He called for the power to go to the workers and for them to rise up, and the goal was to end capitalism and create a classless society. Marx even at one point said, "Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains," which was a huge thing. So Marxism is actually going to briefly flourish. In Germany, social democracy is going to emerge. This is a political ideology in which there is a gradual transition from capitalism to socialism instead of a violent one. And following the Russian Revolution of 1917, Russia is going to become the world's first communist country. But like I said, we'll talk a lot more about that next semester when we do World War I. So eventually, Marxism is going to lose its appeal. Flaws are going to emerge. Nationalism versus class loyalty, crossing these borders, a lot of people aren't going to want to do it. And most economies included elements of capitalism regardless. And I'd like to point out, though, for as great communism looks on paper, that's it. It's never been truly achieved in the form that Marx called for. Even the Soviet Union didn't get anywhere near as close to it as what Marx would have wanted. Alright, that is it for notes for this chapter and for the semester. So again, as a reminder, your assignment is to complete the Chapter 19 review guide. I will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.